Since I was 14, I have been fascinated by all kinds of mysticism, the occult, and the supernatural. It all started quite trivially. I bought a newspaper called Oracle and got completely absorbed in it. Now I realize that you couldn't find a more sensationalist newspaper, and it was aimed precisely at people like me, who were weak-minded and believed everything they read. The newspapers were replaced by articles and books from the internet after our Khrushchev apartment finally got connected. And reading was replaced by various experiments and rituals. No, I didn't kill goats and virgins in the moonlight over a pentagram. These were harmless rituals with mirrors, candles, and spells. However, I quickly became disappointed with the results, or rather the lack thereof. Next in line were various psychotechniques, instant memorization, NLP, speed reading, lucid dreaming, and so on. And while the rest quickly bored me or weren't as effective as I thought they would be, lucid dreaming became a real revelation for me. Sitting in school, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to stand it and would run home to sleep, hoping to have a lucid dream and anticipating what I would do there. With a good imagination and, albeit limited, drawing experience, I created truly incredible worlds in my dreams. At first, these were scenes from movies, games, and books I had read, but then my imagination took over. Over the course of 3 years, I visited hundreds of worlds, trying everything I could imagine, including sex, even though I was a virgin. Why would you need a girlfriend when you can imagine a harem of the most beautiful women in the world who are ready for anything? And even if the feelings are dulled, they are still quite realistic. Just remember to change your underwear afterwards. Sorry for the details. After so much practice, entering a lucid dream became easier for me than going out to buy bread. It had long since ceased to be a matter of luck or chance. People are usually advised to use 1 or 2 methods to become conscious in their dreams. I had more than a dozen methods. However, you get used to everything, and what once seemed like an unimaginable miracle is now commonplace. At that time, I finished school and enrolled in an institute in a neighboring city to study architecture. It wasn't exactly my dream, but the specialty was close to me and appealed to me, plus I have a good imagination, spatial thinking, and grades in physics and mathematics. There was another reason why I chose this particular institute. Not far from it, our family had a 1-room apartment that we had inherited from my grandmother. Until I graduated, it was rented out to supplement the family budget, but now, by prior agreement, it was considered mine. The decision of what to do with it, continue renting it out or move in, was entirely up to me. I decided to move and, at the same time, get closer to it. In fact, there was no real decision to make, as my parents had long wanted to get rid of me after school, and I shared their opinion. After all, your own apartment is your own apartment. You can do whatever you want, clean up when you want, and set your own rules. Someone else in my place would have thrown a party long ago, inviting all their friends and acquaintances for such an important occasion. But I've never liked large groups of people, and large groups of people don't like me. With my hobbies, I've always had 2 friends, one of whom stayed in my hometown, and the other left to study in the capital. The move to a new place went surprisingly quickly and easily. I only took my clothes and my computer with me. The rest could be bought or was left behind by my grandmother and previous tenants. At the time, we were lucky to rent our apartment to a childless, intelligent couple. They didn't cause any trouble or steal anything. On the contrary, they used the reduced rent to do some cosmetic repairs and buy furniture, appliances, and other small items. It was a shame to evict such good tenants, but I needed a place to live too. But after they left, the apartment was clean, well-kept, and livable. That's how I got my own place, a refuge and a fortress from adversity and problems. Around the same time, I got a job as a car washer at a car service center, so I wouldn't have to depend on my parents for money. About 6 months had passed since I moved. By that time, the novelty of living on my own and studying at the institute had worn off, and the disadvantages of living alone began to manifest themselves more and more strongly. No, work and study were stressful, but they were quite natural, and what's more, I enjoyed my independence. Loneliness began to weigh on me. At school, I had at least 2 friends, but now I hadn't made any friends. It was partly my fault. I had never been the life of the party, but also because groups based on interests and acquaintances had formed in the first few weeks, and I remained the guy no one notices. I didn't stand out in my studies, so no one asked me about them or asked for my help. I didn't have any interests that I could talk about, and because of my job, I didn't participate in extracurricular activities. In principle, it wasn't as bad as it sounds. I didn't have much time to kill, and the complete loneliness was alleviated by a stray cat that I picked up a couple of months after moving. However, before going to sleep, in the moments between sleep and wakefulness, I had a desire to talk to someone, to hug, to have sex in the end. In my dreams, which were now almost always lucid, I rested. I built fantasy castles and skyscrapers reaching to the heavens, flew over endless fields, and destroyed thousands of imaginary enemies. It didn't save me from loneliness, because the characters I created danced to my tune, but it was quite entertaining, even if it became less and less so each time. The next day was a day off. It was rare for my days off from work and college to coincide, and now I was sitting in front of my computer, not knowing what to do with myself. It had been raining for 3 days, and even if it hadn't, I didn't know what I would have done. I didn't really want to go to my parents' house and come back in the evening, so I was browsing through endless stories, posts, and pictures that were supposed to be funny. Then, by chance, I stumbled upon a page about tulpas. A tulip is, so to speak, an imaginary fragment of consciousness that has its own will, opinion, and access to the subconscious. This interested me. I don't have the time or energy for a real girl, but I do have enough for an imaginary one. Of course, it was scary that I was essentially fragmenting my consciousness and could become a psychopath. However, according to the article, getting rid of it was easier than easy. Just don't think about it and don't notice it, and it will disappear on its own. What the hell, I thought, and decided to give it a try. This is where my lucid dreaming skills came in handy. The first step was to form an image and keep it in my mind and imagine it in reality. It's worth mentioning that most often in my lucid dreams, I created a small clearing with a lake, on the bank of which stood a neat little house. I could describe what was there and where it was with my eyes closed. Every detail, every twig and every utensil in the house was created and placed in its place dozens of times. So, having quickly formed my favorite place, I began to create an image. I dismissed the warning that it was better not to create an image of the opposite sex. I'm not going to fall in love with a fragment of consciousness, right? All kinds of ponies, hamsters, and other creatures were also out of the question. I didn't like them. I settled on a girl. Thank God I'm not a beginner. When I first started, my imagination of girls, and indeed of any people, resulted in a Picasso painting. Now I could create an image of anyone I had seen well at least once. First, I created Jessica Alba. I like her appearance. But I changed a lot: her figure, breasts, slightly enlarged hips, changed her nose and eyes, but I was still dissatisfied. For about a week, I looked at the faces of actresses, stars, and just beautiful girls. For the body, I looked at porn and erotic actresses. It's worth mentioning that I didn't have much time to search, which is why it took so long. The idea of creating the perfect girl captivated me so much that I didn't even notice how I was imagining her in real life, thinking about her, staring at the faces of girls on the street, at the university, on the bus, looking for features that might come in handy. That's when I came up with her name, Lisa. As a child, I watched a TV series about guys who created a girl. Right now, I felt like those guys, only they were limited by the script and the actress playing the role, while I was not limited by anything. A week of searching, thinking, and trying paid off. Lisa turned out to be incredibly beautiful. I felt like a sculptor who had created his best statue. The image was so perfect that adding or removing even the slightest detail would only make it worse. After that, I imagined her everywhere, imagining how she would talk to me and what she would do. At first, nothing worked, and after a month I was ready to give up. But then I read that it takes many people years to achieve this. I set myself a condition. If there were no results in another month, I would give up. At first, creating the image required some effort, but now I could just think about it and it would appear. Details were added, clothes and hair began to blow in the wind, movements became more natural, and she spoke as if she were real. But as soon as I relaxed, the image faded away. It all happened quite suddenly. About a month and a half after I started trying, I suddenly realized that the image was moving on its own. I didn't need to imagine it or concentrate. Now she was like an NPC with a set command. Lisa tried to say something, but I couldn't hear her. A week later, I heard a quiet, indistinct whisper. And after another week, I was already talking to her as if she were real, both in my life and in my dreams. And here's what I learned about her. Lisa knew everything I knew, even things I had forgotten or couldn't remember. She knew me better than I knew myself, so it was always interesting to talk to her. She had her own opinions and point of view. Once, she talked to me for 2 days because I called her an imaginary part of my personality. She knew that herself, she just didn't like that I considered her to be just a doll. Of course, she couldn't touch material things. But she could touch me, and surprisingly, I could feel her touch as if I were touching a normal girl. So that people wouldn't think I was crazy, I didn't talk to her outside the house. Lisa knew this and always teased me, trying to make me laugh or undressing right in the middle of the street. My life took on new colors. It became not only more fun, but also easier. If I forgot something for an exam, she could help me out, and if I had nothing to do at work or at home, I entertained myself by talking to Lisa. Over time, I became more and more convinced that the advice not to create a tulpa of the opposite sex was more than justified. Just imagine, a perfectly beautiful girl walks around your apartment, not particularly bothered by her clothes. Moreover, she is ready for anything and quite tangible to the touch. From the moment she was created, no, even before that, thoughts came to me about what this would be like. I was driven by curiosity, lust, and the desire to lose my virginity, even if in such an unusual way. What stopped me was the warning that under no circumstances should I do this. A tulpa is fueled by emotions, and sex, as one of the strongest emotions, can cause her to lose control. Apparently sensing or knowing my thoughts, Lisa only added fuel to the fire by walking around naked, climbing on me to hug and kiss me. She was like a cat in heat, showing me with all her actions that she wanted me. When I told her to stop, it didn't last long. A month later, I gave in and spent the whole night indulging in lust with her. I don't know what it's like in reality, but I've never felt better. And to my surprise, nothing bad happened. Nothing really changed about her, except for a slight smile after sex and calmer behavior. No, I didn't fall in love with her. I admired her and respected her, but I didn't fall in love. It's hard to fall in love with a figment of your imagination. Only later, much later, did I realize some of the little things that were wrong with her. At the time, I didn't see it or didn't want to see it. Every time I talked to a real girl, she got offended or jealous. Later, she started to simply prevent me from communicating or even looking at members of the opposite sex. At the time, I thought it was just childish jealousy. I was wrong. It happened during the summer holidays. I met a very nice girl named Masha on the internet. We had common interests and views, and we understood each other perfectly from the moment we met. It had been a long time since I had communicated so closely with a real person, let alone a girl. It was a breath of fresh air and gave me hope for a real relationship. I left Lisa at home, if you can say that about an imaginary being, and went on a date, lying that I was going out with a friend. I was tired of her resentment and didn't want to listen to a possible hysterical outburst about it. The date went wonderfully. We walked through the park, talking about everything and nothing. It was so nice, so easy to talk to her, even easier than with Lisa, who was basically a big kid in a woman's body. I thought we would only walk for a little while, but we ended up talking so much that we walked until nightfall. That day, I had my first real kiss, which, oddly enough, wasn't much different from Lisa's kisses, but I liked it much more. An unexpected silence awaited me at home. Usually, when I leave Lisa at home, she runs out to me screaming that she missed me and tries to smother me with hugs. But now it was quiet, too quiet. At first, I thought she wasn't home, forgetting that I was thinking about an unreal person. The cat was nowhere to be seen either, and that little bastard had been sitting at home all day without food and should have been rubbing against my legs and meowing. I turned on the light and saw Lisa. She was sitting in the middle of the room, hugging her knees, swaying from side to side and repeating, "Cheater, cheater, cheater." It felt like she couldn't see me. The cat was trembling under the table. I had never seen a cat like this before. It was a stray with a torn ear, and it was unlikely that anything could scare it. And then I got scared. I remembered all the warnings, all the advice I had been given when creating the tulpa, and I was no longer happy with the once perfect woman sitting on the carpet. When the wave of terror passed, Lisa raised her eyes, or rather what was left of them. She had scratched them out. Sniffing, as if orienting herself by my fear, she began to approach me. Fear and horror paralyzed my arms and legs. I stood there like an idiot in the middle of the room, unable to say or do anything. The more I was afraid, the more she changed. She looked less and less like a woman, turning into a skeletal parody of herself with long nails, an animal-like face, and disheveled, sparse hair. When she came within a step of me, I was saved by the cat, who pounced on her. The surreal nature of the scene before my eyes snapped me out of my stupor. I ran away, closing the door behind me, and sat on a bench in front of the building until morning, afraid that it would somehow get out. In the morning, I gathered my courage and went inside. Nothing was missing. Everything was in its place, and I would have thought it was all a dream or a hallucination if it weren't for my cat at the doorstep, with its neck broken. After that, I threw up and don't remember anything. I don't remember how I got here either. That's how it all happened.